Saw the NASDAQ 100 get a bearish reversal of conditions with momentum shifting. Wednesday with the gap lower. Now we're getting it with the S&P 500. Again, this is what I'm talking about with the awesome oscillator, by the way. Again, it may be that we see these end up just going negative, but again, if you start getting green bars, you can confirm a lower high or a divergence. May go lower. Even if we attempt to rebound, we still may go lower before that completes. But I'll be watching to see what becomes of this. Same thing with the MACD because it went higher with NASDAQ. Momentum is bearish at the moment. We'll see if it remains that way. We'll be watching on the weekly chart for the divergence to complete here with the MACD. And the awesome oscillator, will we get a red bar this week or next week? If we close down strong, an evening star reversal by the end of the week. I talked about that before this sell-off happened. Of our topping tail and doji spinning top-looking candlestick last week. We'll talk about that over the weekend, seeing how we close. With the S&P, again, really nice looking divergences on the MACD and the awesome oscillator here. I'll be looking for a red bar this week or next week. And again, actually for a reversal of conditions here in the weekly time frame. But there are a couple different ways it can unfold, which I've been talking about. Weekly, here is the daily. Again, might get a few red bars. This is our second red bar. We're now getting a reversal of conditions. This is bearish. Momentum signals are now flipping. A couple of trend signals, and we lost a 10-period moving average now. We got red bars. Got a red bar yesterday, one today, and now we're getting a bearish reversal of conditions. You see the little red arrow? Means that we close below the cloud. We're dropping below the 10 period. And again, we've got the sell signal momentum. And this is why I keep saying there's no guarantee we fill these gaps. We may have to go a whole lot lower. And do get a bounce with the bullish falling wedge that's forming. It just may be a feeble bounce. We don't know. Will lead to a reversal to fill the gap. So again, that in mind, we'll be watching. Probably going to see more red bars here going forward on the awesome oscillator, and the MACD has now got that rollover. Already had that with NASDAQ. Tell you again, I warned you about the 9 count that formed. We had the 9 count complete, push above here on NASDAQ daily chart. Got the 9 count above the upper band, and again we reversed off of that with the CPI sell-off. Again, we bounced. I told you we get a lower high with the 78.6 Fibonacci in the golden pocket area, hit it right on the nose, and then we lost the 10-period moving average on NASDAQ. Then we, gapping lower, lost the 20. And again, this is where complacency was at its highest level, and signals playing out. I warned you about it, and the prior week before this 9 count in the daily time frame, we got it. The 9 counts on the weekly charts with NASDAQ and S&P. And again, with the 9 counts, you either turn immediately, well, we're turning immediately here. Or the S&P, we got it, and we went a little bit higher. This is the daily chart of the NASDAQ. Same thing on the weekly chart. And again, NASDAQ weekly chart here, the same exact signals prior week. I'm sorry, the previous 2 weeks. And a little bit higher on the weekly chart with that. And that was it. It was a topping tail. You couldn't even close above it. And it was a candle, a reversal candle for the NASDAQ. And I told you that last week, before we started this week, I told you if we got a big, ugly red bar, you could have an evening star reversal. We'll be watching to see how we close. At a 13.9 on both NASDAQ and S&P. This is the NASDAQ weekly chart. But what is scary is you have a 9 count sell signal on the monthly. Here is the NASDAQ monthly, and you're getting a topping tail. I'll bring it up closer in a moment. But I wanted to show you, again, we had this 9.9 signal here in the monthly time frame. We ended up going a little higher, and that marked a 37.5% sell-off. We got a 9 count bottom here. That marked the bottom. And we got a 9 count, and that ended up producing a reversal. This is likely going to produce a reversal. You have a 9 here. It's not a perfected signal, but it still produced a pullback. You got the trend extension, and now you have another 9 going on right now in the monthly time frame. So we had a 9 count in the weekly. We have a 9 count that's now playing out in the daily. A few days ago, as I talked about, with the July 11th reversal. Now here in the monthly, you got a topping tail. So we'll see what this candle looks like. You got to be above the bar from 4 months ago. Have the count complete. S&P monthly chart is on bar 8. NASDAQ's on bar 9. Bar 8 or 9 could be the high of the count. Again, they still may get a larger divergence, but if we look at this, we're going to form a topping tail in the monthly time frame. Now, the month has still got more time. We still have 9 more trading days. Last day of the month is with the Fed, so we'll be watching to see what kind of candlestick forms right here. And do we get a rebound back up? But we'll be looking closes. If we do get a rebound back up, to fill the gap. Listen carefully. If we rise back up and try to form a right shoulder right here, right now, on the 60-minute chart of the NASDAQ and with the semiconductors, which you'll see in this video, and then still sell off by the end of the month going into the Fed meeting, you still may end up with the topping tail, even if we rebound back up. So we'll be watching to see how we close. If we continue lower and then rebound back up, you might end up with the doji. So we'll see what it looks like by the end of the month, and there's a couple of different possibilities. A shooting star, a gravestone doji, just a regular doji. I'm continuing to monitor it, but you have a 9 count on the monthly. You had a 9 count in the weekly just over 2 weeks ago, and you had that 9 count in the daily, and now we're seeing the selling pressure for NASDAQ. Divergences begin to play out in the weekly time frame. Time to show you the S&P sequence counts, but wanted to show you the NASDAQ. It's really leading the market lower, following the semiconductors and Nvidia's lead. I want you to listen to me very carefully. The signals are bearish for the NASDAQ. There is no guarantee we fill that gap right now. We could, if we get help from the semiconductors and from Nvidia, we could. They both have gaps as well. But momentum is now going negative, and we have the sell signals, okay, forming. Momentum and the trend are now bearish for the NASDAQ. It's come to this line right here. You see this line right here? This represents the short-term trend, the short-term swing moves. And if we can bounce right there, again, we can go back up and try to fill the gap. Signals could still remain negative. There's no requirement that we do that. That's just why I was warning you, back up at the top, we were getting these warning signs of a top. Remember I talked about these things at great length and detail over here. It gave us a correction over here. It gave us a correction, failed to flip the trend. Over here, it is flipping the trend. Here, we're going negative. We didn't do that over here with these moves. The divergence, and that gave us the top. And we may have to go a lot lower before we fill that gap. We may get a feeble bounce. Be watching. And again, you've got a possible little miniature head and shoulders, as I've said. You see this little gray shaded area right here? This is telling us something big is getting ready to happen. Now, if we come down here to support and we bounce right in here, bounce right off this level right now, and you go back up and you fill the gap and get a right shoulder, again, this is telling us something big is about to happen, and it's probably going to be a downward move. Topping process could happen surrounding the Fed, or if we just start selling off sharply, could be a continuation if that pattern does not set up. But we know something big is getting ready to happen, like over here, like over here. Those were moves to the upside. Over here, move to the downside. So again, this is telling us something is setting up to happen. It could take several days to complete, but it is warning something's getting ready to happen. A big move up or a big move down. That's what it's telling us. Probably a big move down is setting up. With that setting up, there's still the possibility of a rebound. Please support the channel with the link directly below. If you like my chart, if you like my indicators, let me know that. Supporting the channel. I don't sell you anything. They contact me all the time to sponsor my channel, and I turn it all down. I don't want to make merchandise of you and sell you a bunch of junk you don't need. I just ask that you just help out as you can. I need to hear from you in order to make it work. I just put it all out there for free. If you like the information, you like the charts, please let me know that by supporting the channel. If you could step up to the plate and do that today, I would really, really be thankful. Thank you for your consideration for that. Here is the S&P 500. Again, momentum flipped today. The trend signal flipped today. You see the little sell signal? It flipped today. We got a little T for a top with that gap lower. Momentum is now bearish. Now last time, again, momentum flipped bearish here. It didn't flip the trend. Momentum flipped bearish here. Didn't flip the trend. It's tried to go negative, but turned right back to positive. Signals turned back to bullish. Talked about that at the time. We had pushed down. We started getting some warning signals back over here, and then right here we gapped lower. We got this signal, and now we're getting more today with the sell signal. So again, listen carefully. As long as the sell signals remain, we can go a whole lot lower. We're seeing the shadow in the background there saying, again, something big is ready to happen. Again, over here, it was a move up. Over here, it was a move up. Over here, it was a move down. This is telling us something is setting up to happen, probably as we move closer towards the Fed meeting. The negative diversions play out with momentum. Sell signals for the trend and momentum are now present on the S&P 500. Again, no guarantee we fill the gap. We do fill the gap. It's set up for a bigger sell-off. We try to fill it going into the Fed meeting. Pay attention. I encourage you to watch this video all the way through. I got really important things to share with you about what happened today. The S&P down 43 points, down 0.78%. It broke the rising wedge trend line. Rising wedge trend line, we have another trend line channel that we're watching on the 60-minute, but this trend line broke and we bounced off the 20-period moving average. Do you see the blue line there? That's the 20-period. We've broken the 10. Question now is, are we going to try to come fill this gap immediately? We sell off, maybe try to fill it with the Fed. If we've peaked, and this is wave 5, but it also could be that it's 1, 2. This is wave 3 that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And this is now wave 4, and we get one more push to fill that gap with the Fed either later, or we attempt to do it with, immediately and then resume the selling if signals remain bearish. Signals are bearish right now. So again, if this is a wave 3, this could be a wave 4. We could sell off further or even bounce and then sell off, maybe back test the broken trend line. Maybe we don't fill the gap yet and we do it with the Fed. Maybe we just back test, get more selling down to maybe towards the 50, and then we get a bounce with the Fed, fill the gap, and then that's it. And we get a wave 4 and then a wave 5. So that is certainly possible. And that would be that we see a divergence develop on the awesome oscillators if that scenario plays out. Again, signals are now starting to turn bearish on the S&P. NASDAQ, they've already been bearish, previously talked about. If they don't stay bearish, then this other scenario where you have a wave 3, you get a 4, and then you get a 5, then comes into play. But again, ultimately, we're likely headed back to this 4,900 area for a head and shoulders pattern. The question is the peak in here, or will the peak be in over here, maybe surrounding the Fed? Get the Fed meeting there in a week and a half. Watching, if we do rally back up, if the VIX is correct and we get a rally, or if we go lower and get a rally, I'll be watching the broken trend line. I'll be watching the gap fill. Those are the two levels of resistance. Immediately, an immediate rally would have us stall maybe at gap resistance or just above it. The gap fill is way up here. So again, do we just back test that trend line? So something to pay attention to with the S&P. Again, signals are bearish. Now I want to talk about the RSI and the MACD. They both bearish at the moment. The MACD rolled over, but it moved to new high. There's no divergence. We don't have to have a divergence. But if we sell off or even bounce and sell off and fill the gap later, we could see divergence develop with the Fed if the scenario I just talked about where this is 4 and we go up and we get 5. If this is a wave 3 right here. We had the divergence give us a peak right here, gapped lower. Now we've broken the trend line. We're resting on the 20. We'll see if we try to bounce off the 20. This could evolve into a larger divergence, even if we back test and even if we attempt to try to fill the gap or even come down to the low of the session for the gap and not do it on a closing basis, but do it on an intraday basis for that trading session. But could be with the Fed that we end up getting a divergence like this, and where NASDAQ but already diverged from the S&P at this peak, still may end up getting a larger one. Now, no guarantee that they diverge, but it's just something we're paying attention to. We already have one, so we don't need another one, but it could form a larger one. I'll be watching. Do we just start selling off and seeing the bottom fall out of the stock market, or get a kind of a rally and then maybe a back test and then have it fail and continue on downward, or do we attempt to fill that gap? And again, we are in a topping process. A pretty good chance we're going to try to fill this gap before we get a big crash move down to this downside here. So again, whether it's a corrective move here, bigger corrective move, and then we try to do it like I suggested, or whether we do it immediately, remains to be seen. But I'll be watching. Do try to bounce off the 20 period. How big of a rally do we get? But a divergence here, that's played out. That's given us a sell-off. We'll see what happens. Is it corrective, or is a reversal happening right now? Or is there more work to be done and we get something like that? And then we go ahead and go down if divergences form on the awesome oscillators, as I've talked about, and on the MACD. And if Nvidia and the semiconductors have peaked, I've been talking a lot about good chance NASDAQ has. NASDAQ 100 has. Getting a massive topping tail in the monthly time frame. Now, we have a possible bullish falling wedge on the S&P 500 on the intraday charts. On the 50-minute charts, it tried to break out, but then it kind of fell back to that trend line. divergence on the RSI, you've got the divergence on the MACD. We'll be watching to see what happens with this, with the market tomorrow, with the Netflix earnings and other earnings. Where again, we're now in earnings season, the heart of earnings season. We're going to start getting quite a bit of earnings. Possible bullish falling wedge here. Now again, the pattern could still fail if we start dropping down below the low. And again, boundaries change all the time. We know this. So again, I'll be watching to see what happens. Does this thing get confirmed or not? We tried to break out. It kind of fizzled out towards the end of the session there. So it's not very convincing so far, but it is a bullish falling wedge. Again, we'll be watching the gap fill. And again, it may not be that we may just get a bounce, okay, and then still go lower, just a back test of the broken trend line on the rising wedge in the daily. We may fill this gap later, maybe with the Fed next week and a half. We'll be watching to see if we do get a bounce this week or on into next week. How big of a bounce is it? And then what happens with the Fed in just over a week and a half from now. Just be back testing. Again, here's the breakout on the 5-minute chart, the bullish divergences that formed here. You can see on the RSI and the MACD, we broke out, we back tested. So again, maybe we go on our way here, but again, pattern does fail. There's some more support directly below for the NASDAQ that I'll be watching on the 60-minute chart, but we did hit a trend line, an important trend line today. Try to fit it all in, and if we do end up getting a bounce, again, you're going to have some stiff resistance here, a gap resistance, and this lower high that's set up right here, that's the resistance zone at this point, along with the cloud here on the 30-minute chart. So again, if we do try, and then you have the back test of the broken trend line there on the daily chart. So I'll be watching these levels. Again, if we can clear those levels and you can attempt to fill the gap immediately, so suggesting that we could try to attempt to get some kind of bounce. The VIX is suggesting that as well. 60-minute chart, the S&P has come down to the support and resistance line right here, gapping lower. You got that bullish falling wedge. But again, if we drop out of the bottom of the pattern, then you've got your 200 down here. NASDAQ could go a little bit lower. Got your rising trend line right here. Again, we're already breaking that other trend line. So I'll be watching. Does the S&P have to go a little bit lower before we rebound back up, or attempt to rebound immediately with that bullish falling wedge? Again, it's got to get a confirmation follow through, and getting a reversal too early to tell if the pattern will fail. We've come down here to extremes with momentum. So I told you, again, yesterday we reached extremes. We're still down there today, that we could attempt point to rebound. Suggesting a rebound, but we could go lower before we get that rebound down here to the 200 or to the channel line. We'll be watching what happens with the bullish falling wedge. Then with the NASDAQ, look at the NASDAQ. Again, lost the 20. The S&P's testing the 20 here in the daily time frame. The 10 still above the 20 here, but we gapped lower. I warned you this was going to happen. We had warning signals back up at the top. The divergences, some of the divergences I talked about, streams on indicators. So again, I'll be watching the gap. Do we attempt to go back up and try to fill the gap right now, or do we have to go lower before we try to go higher? Now, you do have a possible neckline right here. We're play above it. Maybe we have to go a little bit lower or towards the 50 period, and then we attempt some kind of recovery. We'll be watching to see how it unfolds. But again, we've got signals everywhere. We'll be watching to see, do we attempt to fill that gap? I warned you back up at the top, we had this sell-off, 500 points, the NASDAQ, and I told you that, again, we are likely going to go up and set up a lower high at the 78.6 Fibonacci. We went up, we hit it right on the nose, and I told you that we were likely going to turn back down and break the trend line. That happened with a gap. The thing I warned you about has happened here with this reversal. There's a very good chance Nvidia has topped, NASDAQ has as well. Same thing here, though. Again, possible 1, 2. If this is a 3, this is a 4, then we get a 5. That's still possible. Talking about that possibility on the awesome oscillators. If we just continue down, fill the gap, and then get another lower high and continue down, again, the head and shoulders pattern on the NASDAQ, if in fact we stop making new highs. Bearish for the NASDAQ. If they turn back to bullish, that door is opened. And NASDAQ came down to the trend line. I talked about this yesterday. We had this channel line. We came right down to it, and we found support there directly below. And we hit this support, by the way, right there, the support zone, this low and this low. Directly below, we have this low. And if we do bounce, listen carefully, if attempt recovery, we did get a bottoming tail with the semiconductor ETF. If we attempt recovery here or dip down below the trend line and hit this level and attempt recovery, you got a shot that we get a big rally for a right shoulder or just a gap resistance. If we don't fill it, we get a bounce and you can still get the right shoulder and it would come more in line with this level. Now, again, we may just have a lopsided, slanted kind of a neckline and bounce right here, right now. But I'll be watching because, again, we've become very, very oversold. We're hitting a confluence of support, horizontal support, again, if we go a little bit lower, or this rising trend line of the lower boundary of our channel. So we'll be watching to see if we attempt to get some kind of rebound. Again, if we get a feeble rebound here, say we go a little bit lower and get it, or we get it immediately, again, you could stall there at gap resistance. If you get a bigger rebound, you can come back and try to fill the gap and get a right shoulder, whether it is unbalanced or balanced, it would come in right at that area there, that same area. Unbalanced, this side would be higher than the other side. But again, we'll see if we attempt. No guarantee we attempt to do that. If we break down further, we break the trend line, then again, gap may not get filled until a later date. And break the trend line, the rebound back up might just be back testing it. So again, the signals are bearish, hitting a confluence of support, so we'll be watching that. Now, again, let me just show you this head and shoulders up close, and you can see here we're hitting the trend line, but directly below we have this horizontal support just a little bit lower. We'll see if we reach that level or not. We could just bounce off the trend line, or did we break this level? Again, we've become oversold, but signals are bearish at this time. Nothing goes straight down, nothing goes straight up, so we'll be watching to see what happens. Possible head and shoulders, little miniature head and shoulders here, and a much larger one that I've been talking about on the daily chart. And NASDAQ was down, NASDAQ 100 down 94 points today, down just under 0.5%. I've talked about this little miniature head and shoulders pattern. Again, back over here, I told you there's a very good chance we had a top right here. My signals were warning that we were going to get a sell-off. I talked about that at the time. After we had that drop, I told you we were going to get a lower high in the golden pocket, likely at the 78.6 Fibonacci, and we hit it right on the nose. And then we began to drop, and we got that gap yesterday, new today. So down here is the neckline I'm watching. I told you that, again, very good chance we're going back down to the rising trend line and the 200 or this horizontal support, those three levels I'm watching. The bounce right here, right now, off the trend line and overthrowing the 200, or dance around here a little bit more and try to rebound. Also, it could be that we have to form a better divergence. Say we bounce a little bit and then we come back down, and we gotta, get a little bit of a bounce, and then we come back down and then rally next week. This is predicting a rally either tomorrow or on Monday, 85% of a chance. These are the levels I'm watching: horizontal support, the 200 period here, and that rising channel line. So just some things I'm paying attention to. The MACD, we are below the 50, by the way. The 50 is pointing down, and the MACD is in negative territory. If we do see further selling pressure, then you might end up forming a divergence on the histogram here before the MACD gets a bullish cross. No guarantee. I mean, we just may go into positive territory and get it tomorrow and try to find a bottom here, or find a bottom and then, like I said, come back down just and get a little tiny bounce. So we'll see how it unfolds. But again, playing out as we thought they would for the NASDAQ, for Nvidia, and for the semiconductors, it's being a drag on the entire market. We'll be watching this gap. Remember, the S&P gapped near the high, so good chance they try to move to a new high surrounding the Fed. NASDAQ has likely peaked. Unless this is, again, a wave 4, but unless Nvidia and the semiconductors can move to new highs, it's going to be pretty tough for NASDAQ to do that, because it follows conductors and Nvidia. 5%. Now, the VIX was up over 10%. We closed at 10.01%, 1.45 up to just under 16. And you know what that means. That means in the next two trading sessions, the VIX is predicting we will either get a bounce or a bottom. That in the next two trading sessions, there is an 85% chance that we will get a bounce. Go lower if it's a day. We may go lower Friday, but then get a bounce on Monday. The bottom's in today. That's not what it means. It means that within 2 days, a bottom can form and we can get an update. That's all it means. Historical data, 85% of the time when the VIX rises above 10% in the next 2 trading days, you get a bounce or a bottom. It doesn't mean it's over, it's over, it's over. That's not what it means. It's what it means is we can get a bounce, an update, or a short-term bottom. This is the VIX. It just looks at it looks at implied volatility over the next 30 days. 15% chance the signal will fail. When it fails is when the VIX is going parabolic. You have something like the financial crisis and the Lehman moment where the VIX is just going surging day after day. Parabolic events. That's when it does not work. And we're closing above the 200 now. Again, if we start moving in a parabolic move, it's not going to work. You're going to have the 15% chance failure. If the support levels on the NASDAQ can hold, maybe we attempt to rebound. Momentum is now bearish. Both the NASDAQ and the S&P. The S&P, I told you, was likely going to follow the NASDAQ and see momentum turn bearish. Already had NASDAQ turn bearish earlier in the week. I talked about that. We're seeing it with the S&P 500. Momentum signals are bearish. Trending signals are starting to turn bearish. Watching, but there's an 85% chance that either Friday or Monday we can have an update. Doesn't mean the selling is over. Doesn't mean it comes in and now here we go, the sell-off's done. That's not what it means. Just want to make that clear. All it means is we can get a short-term bottom or a bounce. That's all it means. 85% of the time, those signals are correct. 15% of the time, they are not. We'll see what happens. Again, we do have the gap here. We had a gap with the S&P 500. We'll be watching the gap. We had the triangle breakout. Remember, I've been talking about how the VIX was warning. The VIX was warning that something was getting ready to happen because the VIX had a discrepancy. The VIX had a series of higher lows. The S&P got a series of higher highs. It was not moving to new lows, while the S&P was moving to new highs. Then we got above the 50-period moving average. I told you that on Monday. We closed above the 50-period moving average. And when the S&P 500 gets above the 50-period moving average, when the VIX gets above the 50-period moving average, bad things start happening on the S&P 500. Told you we have the tightening of the Bollinger Bands. So again, it was predicting something was about to happen. I've talked about that. We closed back above the 50-period moving average, and we tagged that upper band. I told you, hold above the 50. Volatility can happen. If we drop back below it, then you'll have less volatility. We held above it, and again, now we're above the 200. This is our second close, our fourth close above the 50-period moving average. Now again, the gap we're going to be watching. Listen to me carefully. We may or may not fill the gap. We don't know. We don't know if it's a gap and go, a gap and fill, or a gap and trap. More about that in a minute. We got the Netflix earnings and after hours. And by the way, we're going to be getting a boatload of earnings over the next 2.5, 3 weeks going into the Fed meeting. The question is, we're going to attempt to fill the gap sooner or later. That's the question. I'll tell you what I'm watching. But Netflix did beat estimates, ad revenue memberships, as ad-supported memberships rise 34%. And just quickly, here it is. Again, earnings per share, they beat. The revenue, they beat. Now, at the moment, they are down, fluctuating, currently down about 0.32%. Down $2.25, now $3. Closer to 0.5%. They were down sharply lower at the initial report. They had a sharp drop and then began a recovery back up, and now again just down about 0.5% after that rapid, immediate negative drop. So again, we'll be watching to see how the market does tomorrow. How does this impact the market? Netflix with earnings down just a little bit after an initial sharp decline. This about the Taiwan Semiconductor earnings. Initially, there was an attempted rebound. The market sold off, and the semiconductors sold off back to just beyond the 50. I told you to watch for that yesterday. And then we went back up where we opened up at, or I should say towards it, and we got this possible bullish hammer candlestick. Candlesticks mean absolutely nothing unless they are confirmed and get a follow through. Going to be watching. Do we try to bounce with the semiconductors after that big, ugly over 7% drop. Yesterday we were up 0.5%. Today we closed above yesterday's low, but we had that big ugly 7% sell-off. I'll be watching. Do we attempt to fill this gap immediately here, or going into the Fed meeting? I'll be watching. Do we bounce? Does today's low hold or not? We do have, again, a big problem for the NASDAQ, and that is we've had this negative divergence on the RSI and the MACD here with the Semiconductor ETF SMH. You got bearish engulfing candlesticks at the June and July peaks. They're both now confirmed, and the trough low between them formed a M pattern, a double top pattern, and that got confirmed yesterday. We now need a follow through. We may go back up and get the follow through at the Fed. Okay, we may get the follow through immediately. I'm sorry if my voice is a little bit gone here. I was camping in the mountains. It got really cold at night. I got a little bit of a cold, so I apologize. My voice is cracking a little bit, just a little bit under the weather. But look, we've got a confirmation. For the double top to play out, you got to get a follow through. Do we go back and fill the gap? If we do, the market can recover. You can get a head and shoulders forming right here on the semiconductors. You have a double top right now where the second peak is a little bit higher than the first, and the confirmation line we'd have to keep dropping. Okay, and if we go back and fill the gap, then it could evolve into a head and shoulders pattern. Nvidia did not reach the 50-period moving average, but Nvidia did get a bounce. The semiconductors were up just over 0.5%. Nvidia was up 2.63%. We got a bottoming tail here too. So again, maybe we make a move now to go fill that gap. Here we have confirmed the bearish engulfing here. It got a lower high. Semiconductors got a higher high, and so did the NASDAQ. So huge sign that Nvidia is diverging with the NASDAQ. It broke down from the rising wedge, got the bearish engulfing here. And again, that got confirmed right there earlier in the week. The bearish engulfing candlestick, I talked about that when it happened. And then we got the follow through yesterday. And then now we've come back down to, again, a possible double top pattern. And we confirmed that yesterday just ever so slightly. But you need a follow through to confirm a double top here. So again, we'll see if we make a move now to go back and fill the gap before going lower. We'll see if that can happen. Again, the VIX is predicting that we'll have an update in the next 2 trading sessions. Maybe these bottoming tails give us a rebound for the market. We'll be watching closely. I think we're going to sell off over the summer. Whether we go back and fill the gap here or do it later, whatever, I think that we're going to end up selling off going into the summer, get a rebound ahead of the rate cut, and then, again, probably maybe get a bounce with it, or try to bounce ahead of it. You got a possible head and shoulders. I think Nvidia is coming down here to 75. By the way, I think the semiconductor, same thing with the head and shoulders, coming down to 198, which is the low over here. That's my target level for the semiconductors. I think you're going to form a right shoulder and get a bounce. And again, I think we get a summer sell-off into August or September. Back to Nvidia again. I'm taking time to show you these because, again, this is what's moving the market. Good shot. The NASDAQ has topped if the June 20th high holds here on Nvidia, and if this pattern ends up forming. May or may not, too early to tell, but you got a shot at it. We're going to have the FOMC meeting on July 31st. Again, we'll be watching to see if that gives us continuation for Nvidia here, pulling off further, driving us down to summer sell-off. For social media, and if we start rallying back up to fill the gap, hurry up and buy the dip, hurry up, buy the dip. Over here, we had the sell-off, this bearish engulfing. We rose back up, but we couldn't make a new high. Same thing over here. You made a lower high. Then you had the bigger sell-off. Probably, if we do fill the gap, you'll probably get another lower high. But all over social media, buy the dip, buy the dip. The Fed's about to pivot. The market is just going to go to the moon. And again, the market's in a topping process, likelihood, along with Nvidia and the semiconductors. Third believes the pivot is bullish. If you watch my video earlier in the week, I went through it. Pivot is bearish. Don't want to give stocks a tiny bounce, much of a bounce, and then the selling resumes. It's going to pivot. The stock market is likely peaking right now. Topping process, as I've been warning.